The morning rush at London Heathrow Terminal 5 was in full swing when Marcus Thompson stepped through the automatic doors. At 6 feet 7 inches tall and weighing nearly 300 pounds, he commanded attention wherever he went. But today, dressed in a simple black hoodie, worn jeans, and sneakers that had seen better days, he looked nothing like the billionaire entrepreneur the world knew as Big Shaq. Marcus had deliberately chosen this casual outfit for his flight to New York. After months of high-profile business meetings, red carpet events, and constant media attention, he craved anonymity. He wanted to experience what ordinary travelers went through, to understand the service quality of Skywing Airlines from a passenger's perspective rather than an owner's. The airline counter was buzzing with frustrated travelers. A computer system glitch had caused widespread delays, and tempers were running high. Marcus joined the economy class line, watching as stressed passengers argued with overwhelmed staff members. He noticed how differently people were being treated based on their appearance and perceived status. When his turn came, the young clerk barely looked up from her screen. Sarah Mitchell had been working double shifts all week, and her patience was wearing thin. She glanced at Marcus's crumpled boarding pass and frowned. "I'm sorry, sir, but there's been an overbooking situation," she said curtly. "We need to bump some passengers to the next flight." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "But I have a confirmed reservation. I booked this ticket 2 weeks ago." Sarah's expression hardened as she took in his casual appearance and heard his urban accent. "Unfortunately, passengers who purchased economy tickets at discount rates are the first to be reassigned. The next available flight is tomorrow morning." Behind Marcus, a line of increasingly impatient passengers was forming. A well-dressed businessman in an expensive suit pushed forward. "Excuse me, but I have a very important meeting in Manhattan," the man announced loudly. "Surely you can accommodate someone who travels frequently with your airline." Sarah immediately brightened. "Of course, Mr. Davidson, let me check your status." She typed rapidly. "I see you're a platinum member. We absolutely have a seat for you." Marcus watched this exchange with growing interest. He had suspected that Skywing's customer service varied based on passenger appearance and status, but witnessing it firsthand was eye-opening. "What about my seat?" Marcus asked calmly. "As I explained, we need to bump some passengers. You'll receive a voucher for future travel and complimentary hotel accommodation." The businessman, Mr. Davidson, glanced at Marcus dismissively. "Maybe next time dress appropriately for travel. Airlines have standards, you know." A murmur of agreement rippled through the nearby passengers. A middle-aged woman in designer clothes nodded approvingly. "It's about respect. When you dress like that, you can't expect premium treatment." Marcus felt the familiar sting of prejudice he thought he'd left behind years ago. Growing up in East London, he'd faced countless assumptions based on his appearance, accent, and background. Even after building a business empire worth billions, some things apparently never changed. "So let me understand this correctly," Marcus said, his voice remaining steady despite his growing irritation. "You're refusing me a seat that I paid for, based on what exactly?" Sarah's supervisor, James Wellington, had been watching the commotion. He approached with an air of authority, sizing up Marcus with obvious disdain. "Sir, we reserve the right to refuse service to any passenger. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable with a budget airline that better suits your circumstances." The crowd around them was growing, with several passengers pulling out phones to record the confrontation. Marcus noticed a young family with children watching nervously from nearby seats, and an elderly couple shaking their heads in disapproval of how he was being treated. "This is ridiculous," muttered a teenager nearby. "They can't just kick someone off because of how they look." But her parents quickly hushed her. "Don't get involved," her mother whispered sharply. "It's not our business." Marcus realized this was a pivotal moment. He could reveal his identity and watch everyone scramble to accommodate him, or he could see how far this discrimination would go. His business instincts told him this was valuable research into his company's culture and practices. "I'd like to speak to someone in authority," Marcus said firmly. James smirked. "I am the authority here, and I'm telling you that your seat has been reassigned to a more suitable passenger. Security can escort you out if necessary." As if on cue, two security guards approached, their hands resting on their radios. The situation was escalating rapidly, and Marcus found himself at the center of a growing crowd of onlookers, most of whom seemed to support the airline's decision based purely on his appearance. This was about to become a lesson none of them would forget. The security guards flanked Marcus as James Wellington gestured toward the exit. The crowd of passengers watched with a mixture of curiosity and satisfaction, many recording the incident on their phones. Marcus remained calm, but inside, his mind was racing with thoughts about the systematic discrimination happening within his own company. "This is unbelievable," whispered Emma Rodriguez, a young journalist who had been observing the situation. She was flying coach to save her newspaper money, but her instincts told her this story was bigger than a simple overbooking dispute. Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him. Some showed genuine concern, but most displayed either indifference or approval of his treatment. He noticed how quickly people had accepted the airline's decision without questioning its fairness. "Before you escort me anywhere," Marcus said, his voice carrying a subtle authority that made James pause, "I'd like to understand your company's policy on passenger selection for overbooking situations." James shifted uncomfortably. "We follow standard industry practices. Passengers with higher status, full fare tickets, and appropriate presentation receive priority." "Appropriate presentation," Marcus repeated slowly. "Could you define that for me?" Sarah jumped in, eager to justify her actions. "Well, obviously passengers should dress respectably when flying. It's about maintaining the airline's image." An elderly gentleman named Robert Chen, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Excuse me, but I don't see anything inappropriate about this young man's clothing. He's neat and clean." His wife Margaret nodded in agreement. "We've been flying for 40 years, and we've never seen anyone treated like this." James's face reddened. "Sir, please don't interfere. This is an airline matter." But Robert wasn't backing down. "This is a human decency matter. You're discriminating against this man based on his appearance and accent." More passengers began choosing sides. A group of business travelers supported the airline's decision, while families and younger passengers seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. Marcus watched this social experiment unfold with fascination. He was seeing firsthand how prejudice operated in his company, how easily people accepted discrimination when it didn't affect them directly. "Look," said Mr. Davidson, the businessman who had been prioritized earlier, "this isn't about discrimination. It's about standards. Airlines have every right to maintain a certain level of clientele." "Clientele?" Emma Rodriguez spoke up, her journalist instincts kicking in. "Since when do airlines get to judge passengers by their clothes? He paid for a ticket just like everyone else." The teenager from earlier broke free from her parents. "This is so messed up. You can't tell someone they can't fly because they're not wearing a suit." Her mother grabbed her arm. "Ashley, I told you to stay out of this." But Ashley shook her head. "No, Mom. This is wrong, and everyone knows it." Marcus felt a surge of respect for the young woman's courage. She was willing to speak up when most adults remained silent or actively supported discrimination. James, feeling the crowd's mood shifting slightly, decided to escalate. "Security, please escort this gentleman from the premises. He's causing a disturbance." "I haven't raised my voice or made any threatening gestures," Marcus pointed out calmly. "Simply asking questions about your policies hardly constitutes a disturbance." One of the security guards, a middle-aged man named Tony Brooks, hesitated. In his 20 years of airport security, he'd learned to read people. This man didn't fit the profile of a troublemaker. Something about the situation felt wrong. "Sir," Tony said carefully, If you have a valid ticket and haven't violated any regulations, I'm not sure we have grounds to remove you. James's authority was being challenged, and he didn't like it. I'm the supervisor here, and I'm making the call. This passenger is being disruptive and doesn't meet our standards. Emma Rodriguez had been discreetly recording the conversation. What specific standards? She asked. Could you show us the written policy about clothing requirements for passengers? Sarah fumbled through her computer system. It's company policy. Everyone knows that. But surely there's documentation, Robert Chen added. Official policies are always written down. The crowd was growing larger, and other airline staff were beginning to notice the commotion. Marcus could see supervisors conferring in the background, probably wondering why a simple overbooking situation was causing such a scene. A flight attendant named Lisa Park approached the group. She had overheard parts of the conversation and was troubled by what she'd witnessed. "Excuse me, James," she said quietly, "but I've worked for this airline for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone denied boarding based on their clothing, assuming it meets basic decency standards." James glared at her. "Lisa, this isn't your concern. Return to your duties." But the damage was done. More staff members were questioning the situation, and passengers were becoming increasingly vocal about the obvious discrimination. Marcus decided it was time to reveal a small piece of his identity. "I'd like to file a formal complaint about this treatment. Could you provide me with the contact information for your corporate headquarters?" James sneered. "You can file all the complaints you want. I doubt corporate will take the word of someone like you over trained professionals." Marcus smiled for the first time since the confrontation began. "Someone like me? That's an interesting phrase. What exactly do you think I am?" The question hung in the air as passengers leaned in closer, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. The tension in the terminal reached a breaking point as Marcus's question echoed through the crowd. James Wellington's confidence wavered slightly, but his prejudice kept him moving forward. "Look, I don't have time for games," James snapped. "You're clearly not the type of passenger we cater to. Our airline serves business professionals, not—" He gestured dismissively at Marcus's casual attire. Emma Rodriguez stepped closer, her phone still recording. "Not what? Please finish that sentence." James realized he was walking into dangerous territory, but his ego wouldn't let him back down. "Not people who can't afford proper traveling clothes or understand airline etiquette." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Even some of the passengers who had initially supported the airline's decision looked uncomfortable with the blatant classism. Marcus nodded slowly. "So this is about money? About what you perceive as my social class?" "Obviously," Sarah chimed in, still not reading the room. "First class and business passengers invest more in the airline. They deserve priority treatment." Tony Brooks, the security guard, was growing more uncomfortable by the minute. "Ma'am, the gentleman has an economy ticket which he paid for. That should entitle him to economy service regardless of his appearance." Lisa Park, the flight attendant, was watching Marcus carefully. Something about his calm demeanor and the way he carried himself despite the insults suggested there was more to this story. "James," she said quietly, "I really think we should reconsider this situation. This doesn't feel right." But James was too deep into the confrontation to retreat. "Lisa, I've told you twice to stay out of this. Consider this your final warning." Marcus watched the power dynamics play out with clinical interest. He was witnessing how discrimination created a toxic environment that affected not just victims, but also employees who tried to do the right thing. Robert Chen had been quietly observing and finally spoke up again. "Young man," he said to Marcus, "I've been flying for decades, and I've seen a lot of changes in this industry, but I've never seen anything quite like this. What's your name?" For a moment, Marcus considered revealing everything right then. But he was curious to see how much deeper this rabbit hole went. "Marcus," he said simply. "Marcus Thompson." Emma Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly. The name was familiar, but she couldn't place it immediately. She made a mental note to research it later. Meanwhile, the crowd of passengers continued to grow. Some were filming the encounter, others were making phone calls, likely sharing the drama with friends and family. The situation was becoming a public relations nightmare, but James seemed oblivious to the implications. A young mother named Priya Patel approached with her 8-year-old daughter. "Excuse me," she said to James, "but my daughter is asking why that nice man can't sit on the airplane. What should I tell her?" James looked flustered. "Ma'am, this is an adult matter. Please keep your child out of it." But the little girl, Zara, wasn't easily dismissed. "Mama, why are they being mean to him? He seems nice." The innocence of the child's question cut through the adult rationalizations and prejudices. Several passengers looked ashamed, finally seeing the situation through clearer eyes. Marcus knelt down to the little girl's level. "That's a very good question, Zara. Sometimes adults make decisions that aren't very fair. But the important thing is that people like you ask these questions and think about what's right and wrong." James was growing increasingly agitated. "Sir, step away from the child. You're making people uncomfortable." Priya Patel bristled. "He's not making us uncomfortable. Your behavior is what's uncomfortable. This man has been nothing but polite and patient." More passengers began speaking up. Ashley, the teenager, had convinced several of her peers to join her in protest. "This is discrimination, and we all know it," she said loudly. "Just because someone doesn't wear expensive clothes doesn't mean they deserve to be treated like garbage." Her mother finally stopped trying to silence her. Deep down, she knew her daughter was right, even if it made her uncomfortable to confront the prejudice she had initially supported. Marcus stood up and looked around at the divided crowd. "I appreciate everyone who's spoken up for fairness. It takes courage to challenge injustice, especially when it doesn't directly affect you." James checked his watch impatiently. "This theatrical performance needs to end. Security, remove this. Man immediately, or I'll call the police." Tony Brooks sighed heavily. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification and documentation about why you're refusing this passenger's boarding." For the first time, James looked uncertain. "Documentation? I don't need documentation. I'm the supervisor." "Actually, you do," Lisa Park interjected. "Any passenger denied boarding for reasons other than safety or overbooking needs proper documentation. It's company policy." Emma Rodriguez smiled slightly. The airline employees were starting to turn against their supervisor, and James was digging himself deeper with every word. Marcus pulled out his wallet and handed his identification to Tony Brooks. The security guard looked at it, and his expression changed subtly. The last name Thompson was familiar to him, but he couldn't quite place where he'd heard it. "Mr. Thompson," Tony said respectfully, "I apologize for this situation. You clearly have proper identification and a valid ticket." James snatched the ID from Tony's hands and glanced at it dismissively. "Marcus Thompson, never heard of you. That proves my point about the kind of passengers we're dealing with." Several people in the crowd pulled out their phones and began searching for the name Marcus Thompson. In the age of social media, it wouldn't take long for someone to connect the dots. Marcus smiled mysteriously. "James, before this goes any further, I want to give you one last chance to reconsider your position. Are you absolutely certain you want to deny me a seat on this flight?" Something in Marcus's tone made even James pause for a moment, but his pride and prejudice won out once again. "Absolutely certain. You don't belong on my aircraft, and that's final." Marcus nodded slowly. "Your aircraft. Interesting choice of words." Emma Rodriguez's fingers were flying across her phone screen. The name Marcus Thompson had been nagging at her, and suddenly the pieces clicked into place. Her journalism background had taught her to research quickly and thoroughly. When she found what she was looking for, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Oh my God," she whispered, loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. Marcus noticed her reaction but continued his conversation with James. "Since you're so confident in your decision, I assume you're prepared to stand by it when your corporate headquarters reviews this incident?" James laughed mockingly. Corporate will back me up completely. They know the kind of standards we maintain. Lisa. Park had been watching Emma Rodriguez's reaction and moved closer to her. What did you find? She whispered. Emma showed her phone screen to Lisa, whose face immediately went pale. This is Marcus Thompson, Emma said quietly, also known as Big Shaq, the founder and owner of Skywing Airlines. The information spread through the crowd like wildfire. Passengers began pulling up images on their phones, comparing them to the man standing calmly in front of them. The casual clothes and low-key appearance had been a perfect disguise, but the facial features were unmistakably the same as the billionaire entrepreneur who graced magazine covers and business news programs. Robert Chen was one of the first to put it together completely. Good Lord, he muttered to his wife, that's the owner of the airline. Margaret Chen stared in amazement. The one who started from nothing and built this empire? The one they call the people's billionaire? Meanwhile, James continued his tirade, completely oblivious to the revelation spreading through the crowd. I don't care if this nobody files 1,000 complaints. Some people need to learn their place in society. Tony Brooks had overheard the whispered conversations and was now studying Marcus's face more carefully. Recognition dawned on him slowly, and his professional demeanor shifted to barely concealed panic. Sarah, still stationed at her computer, remained focused on her screen and missed the growing commotion. Sir, your replacement flight leaves tomorrow, at 9 a.m. We can provide you with a hotel voucher and meal tickets. Ashley, the teenager, couldn't contain herself any longer. Are you people completely insane? She burst out. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? Her mother finally understood why her daughter had been so upset. This wasn't just about fairness anymore. It was about witnessing the most epic case of misplaced arrogance she'd ever seen. James turned to Ashley with irritation. Young lady, I don't care if he's the Queen of England. Rules are rules. Marcus couldn't help but smile at the irony. The Queen of England, you say? That's an interesting comparison. Priya Patel leaned down to her daughter Zara. Sweetheart, remember this. Moment. This is what happens when people judge others without knowing who they really are. Emma Rodriguez had recovered from her initial shock and was now in full journalist mode. She approached Marcus carefully. Mr. Thompson, could I get a comment about this situation for the record? Marcus looked at her with genuine respect. You figured it out first, didn't you? The research skills come with the job, Emma said with a slight smile. But this is unprecedented. The owner of an airline being denied service by his own company. The crowd pressed closer, and Marcus realized the secret was out. He looked around at the faces surrounding him, seeing a mixture of amazement, embarrassment, and anticipation. Lisa Park approached James with mounting concern. James, we need to talk privately, right now. But James was too caught up in his authority trip to pay attention. Not now, Lisa. I'm handling a difficult passenger situation. James, Lisa said more urgently, you need to listen to me. This is important. Tony Brooks stepped forward as well. Sir, I really think you should reconsider your position on this matter. James looked around at his colleagues with growing annoyance. What is wrong with everyone? It's a simple case of denying boarding to an unsuitable passenger. We do this all the time. Marcus decided it was time to end the charade. He pulled out his phone and made a call that everyone could hear. Hello, Patricia, it's Marcus. Yes, I'm at Heathrow Terminal 5. Yes, at the Skywing counter. No, there seems to be some confusion about my boarding privileges. Patricia Williams, the CEO of Skywing Airlines, had been Marcus's business partner for over a decade. Her voice was loud enough for nearby passengers to hear through the phone. Marcus, what do you mean confusion? You own the airline. What's going on? James's face began to change color as the pieces started falling into place. Sarah looked up from her computer screen for the first time in 20 minutes and saw the crowd of people recording everything with their phones. Patricia, Marcus continued, calmly, It seems that some of our staff have decided that I don't meet Skywing's passenger standards. Apparently, I'm not suitable for travel on my own airline. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the background noise of the busy terminal seemed to fade as everyone waited for what would happen next. James Wellington's world was crashing down around him, but his mind was still trying to reject the impossible reality. That's impossible. You can't be... Marcus ended his phone call and looked directly at James. I can't be what exactly? Successful? Wealthy? The owner of this airline? What is it that I can't be, based on your assumptions about my appearance and background? Sarah had finally managed to pull up Marcus's frequent flyer profile on her computer, and her face went completely white. The screen showed his status as founder-owner, with unlimited privileges and a photo that matched the man standing in front of her. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no, oh no, oh no." The moment of truth had arrived, and there was no escaping the consequences of their prejudice and discrimination. The terminal had gone completely silent, except for the mechanical sounds of conveyor belts and distant announcements. James Wellington stood frozen, his face cycling through shades of red, white, and green as the full magnitude of his mistake became clear. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at her computer screen. The profile showed not just Marcus's ownership status, but also his personal information, including his net worth, which exceeded the GDP of some small countries. She had just denied boarding to a man worth $12 billion because she thought he looked poor. "Mr. Thompson," she stammered. I had no idea. I mean, you weren't dressed like..." Marcus held up a gentle hand to stop her. "Dressed like what, Sarah? Like a rich person? What exactly does wealth look like to you?" Emma Rodriguez was frantically taking notes, knowing she was witnessing one of the biggest business scandals of the year. Around them, passengers were recording everything, and she could already see posts going live on social media platforms. Robert Chen stepped forward with his wife, Margaret. "Mr. Thompson, we're terribly sorry about how you've been treated. We tried to speak up, but clearly not enough people were willing to stand up for what was right." Marcus smiled warmly at the elderly couple. "You did exactly what decent people should do. You saw injustice and spoke against it, even when it was uncomfortable. That takes real character." Tony Brooks, the security guard, approached with obvious remorse. "Sir, I sincerely apologize. I should have recognized the situation earlier and put a stop to it." "Tony," Marcus said, reading his name tag, "you actually did your job correctly. You questioned whether there were legitimate grounds to remove me. That's exactly what good security personnel should do." Meanwhile, James was still trying to process the situation. His supervisor brain was calculating the career damage, but his ego was still fighting the reality. "This has to be some kind of mistake," he muttered. "The owner wouldn't fly economy. He wouldn't dress like a normal person." Ashley, the teenager, interjected with teenage bluntness. "Maybe he wanted to see how his airline actually treats regular customers. Turns out, pretty terribly." Her mother, who had initially supported the airline's discrimination, looked ashamed. "Ashley's right. We should have spoken up sooner. This whole situation is disgraceful." Lisa Park approached Marcus with professional concern. "Mr. Thompson, on behalf of the staff who weren't involved in this incident, I want to apologize. This isn't representative of Skywing's values." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, Lisa, I'm afraid it might be more representative than we'd like to admit. This little experiment has been very educational." The crowd of onlookers had grown to include other airline employees, airport staff, and travelers from different terminals who had heard about the commotion. The story was spreading rapidly through social media, with hashtags like Skywing Scandal and Big Shaq Denied trending. Priya Patel's daughter Zara tugged at Marcus's sleeve. "Are you really the boss of the airplane people?" Marcus knelt down to her level again. I am, Zara. What do you think about how the airplane people treated me today? The 8-year-old considered this seriously. I think they were very mean. Mama says we should never judge people by their clothes because you can't see their heart from the outside. Your mama is a very wise woman, Marcus said, glancing up at Priya with approval. Emma Rodriguez had finished her preliminary notes and approached Marcus again. Mr. Thompson, this situation raises serious questions about systematic discrimination in the airline industry. Do you believe this is an isolated incident? Marcus stood up and addressed not just Emma, but the entire crowd that had gathered. Unfortunately, I suspect this happens more often than we'd like to admit. The difference is that usually the victims don't have the power to fight back or the platform to expose it. Sarah had been trying to figure out how to salvage the situation. Mr. Thompson, please allow me to upgrade you to first class immediately. Complimentary, of course, with full amenities and— Stop, Marcus said firmly. That's exactly the problem. You're offering me special treatment now because you know who I am. What about all the other passengers who get discriminated against but don't happen to own the airline? James finally found his voice, though it came out as a croak. Sir, There's been a terrible misunderstanding. If you'll just allow me to explain— Marcus looked at him with a mixture of disappointment and pity. James, there's been no misunderstanding. You made your position crystal clear. You believed I was poor, so you treated me as less than human. You assumed I was uneducated, so you dismissed my questions. You judged me by my appearance and accent, and you were proud of it. The crowd murmured in agreement, many nodding their heads at the accurate assessment. A Skywing corporate executive who had been monitoring the situation remotely through security cameras finally arrived on scene. Patricia Williams, the CEO, had caught the first available flight from the New York office when she received Marcus's call. Marcus, Patricia said as she approached, slightly out of breath. I got here as fast as I could. What on earth is going on? Marcus gestured to the scene around them. Patricia, meet James Wellington and Sarah Mitchell. They've been educating me about Skywing's customer service standards. Patricia looked around at the crowd of recording passengers and immediately understood the public relations disaster unfolding before them. But more than that, she saw the genuine hurt in Marcus's eyes despite his calm demeanor. James, Patricia said in a voice that could freeze water, you're suspended pending a full investigation. Sarah, the same applies to you. Security will escort you both from the premises. But Marcus held up his hand again. Actually, Patricia, I want to handle this differently. This situation represents a teaching moment, not just for these individuals, but for our entire company culture. Emma Rodriguez leaned in closer with her recording device. This was becoming a masterclass in leadership and crisis management. Marcus looked around at all the faces, from the ashamed employees to the supportive passengers to the curious onlookers who had joined the crowd. What he said next would determine not just the fate of the individuals involved, but potentially the future culture of his company. Marcus Thompson stood at the center of the crowd, every phone camera trained on him, every face waiting for his next words. He had built his empire on the principle that how you treat people in their worst moments reveals your true character. Now it was time to demonstrate that principle. Everyone, he said, his voice carrying easily across the terminal, what we've witnessed today isn't just about one supervisor or one gate agent making bad decisions. It's about a culture that allows discrimination to flourish unchecked. James Wellington looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Sarah Mitchell was crying quietly, understanding that her prejudices had just cost her everything. But Marcus wasn't finished. James, Sarah, he continued, I'm not going to fire you today. Instead, I'm going to give you an opportunity that most people never get. The chance to truly understand the impact of your actions and to grow from this experience. Patricia Williams looked surprised, as did several members of the crowd. Emma Rodriguez made sure her recorder was capturing every word of what was becoming an unprecedented response to corporate discrimination. Marcus addressed James directly. "You're going to spend the next month working in customer service training, programs, but not as an instructor. You'll be a student, learning from people who've experienced discrimination firsthand. You'll hear their stories, understand their pain, and hopefully develop the empathy that was missing today." He turned to Sarah. "And you'll be working with our diversity and inclusion team, helping to develop new training protocols to ensure this never happens again. You'll also personally apologize to every passenger who witnessed this incident." The crowd murmured approvingly. This wasn't just punishment. It was rehabilitation with purpose. Ashley, the teenager who had spoken up from the beginning, couldn't contain her admiration. "That's the coolest thing I've ever heard. Instead of just firing them, you're making them learn why what they did was wrong." Her mother nodded, finally understanding the lesson her daughter had been trying to teach her all along. Marcus addressed the entire crowd of passengers. "To everyone who spoke up for fairness today, Robert and Margaret Chen, Priya and Zara Patel, Ashley and her family, Emma Rodriguez, and others, thank you. You proved that ordinary people can stand up to injustice, even when it's uncomfortable." Robert Chen stepped forward. "Mr. Thompson, you've shown us something remarkable today. Instead of using your power for revenge, you've used it for education. That's true leadership?" Marcus smiled. "Robert, the real leadership came from people like you who spoke up without knowing who I was. That's courage, without expectation of reward." Tony Brooks, the security guard who had questioned the situation from the beginning, approached Marcus. "Sir, thank you for recognizing that some of us were trying to do the right thing. It's not always easy to challenge authority." "Tony," Marcus replied, "you followed proper protocol and questioned suspicious orders. That's exactly what we want from our security personnel. In fact, I'd like to discuss a promotion with you." Emma Rodriguez had been documenting everything, and now she had a crucial question. "Mr. Thompson, will this incident change how Skywing operates going forward?" Marcus nodded decisively. "Emma, this experience has shown me that we need systematic changes. We're implementing new policies immediately. First, all customer service interactions will be recorded and reviewed randomly. Second, we're establishing an anonymous reporting system for employees to report discrimination. Third, we're creating a passenger bill of rights that guarantees equal treatment regardless of appearance, accent, or perceived social status." Patricia Williams was taking notes rapidly. "Marcus, I'll have the legal and HR teams draft these policies immediately." Furthermore, Marcus continued, "we're going to institute a secret shopper program where employees travel incognito to test our own service standards. If our staff can't treat every passenger with dignity, they shouldn't be working in customer service." Little Zara Patel had been listening intently to the grown-up conversation. "Mr. Airplane Boss," she said, tugging at Marcus's sleeve again, "are you going to teach all your workers to be nice to everyone?" Marcus